If you ever study out depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, psychosis, and look at the symptoms that come with all of these, you'll always find gastrointestinal symptoms of some sort. Mm-hmm. Always. In every disorder.
Yeah.
It's always there.
Without fail.
Without fail. You never have the mental disorder without the gut disorder. Mm-hmm. They always go together. There's always both happening at the same time.
Do you think there's anything fundamentally wrong with the brain itself?
There's, if injury, possibly, the injury could be a factor. There's also, there's birth defects. That's another possibility,
But they would be known. Like
they
you would know
very,
if you had a birth defect, right?
That wouldn't be something that would develop when you're 20.
Yeah. So you would know that from day one.
We'd find that very early on. Exactly. There would be a...
Well, I would suppose that 95% plus of the people watching or that know someone that's going through that, the majority of cases, they don't have a traumatic brain injury. Right. There's obviously those circumstances, but a lot of the time the people experiencing chronic levels of mental illness due to things that there's no causative factor that they know of.
Right. Didn't have blunt head trauma.
Yeah.
Didn't, people that are developing these things in adulthood, it's not genetic.
Yeah.
It was, the genetics may be triggered, and activated, but it wasn't a genetic disease. Mm-hmm. This was something that developed. And if they had the right, the right triggers in their genes for this to develop quickly, then you develop sooner than later.
Yeah.
But your, schizophrenia, psychosis, anxiety, depression, all of them have a gut component to them. If they have a gut disorder component to them, they're going to have a nutritional deficiency of some sort.
To me, science is the real need behind what's going on. Why are these things changing? Why am I having these issues? It has to do with how do you make the neurotransmitters that cause you to be happy in the first place? Or what's not working to drive my anxiety up? Or why am I not calming down enough to go to sleep? So my own personal journey in dealing with my own family, I have 4 beautiful children, an amazing wife. And when I was 40 years old, I was struggling with serious fatigue, chronic fatigue, in fact, pain, anxiety, issues of losing everything in my life. I lost everything, even my cars, back in the crash in 2008. And today I've turned around and overcome all these chronic illnesses to be able to help other people do the same thing today. In my practice today, I see many people suffering with anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Most of it has to go back to gut health. And that's our approach, is what's going on in your gut that could be creating the problems.
An amazing thing that has come to light with recent scientific studies is that approximately 85 to 90% of serotonin, our feel-good neurotransmitters, are produced in the gut. When you take an antidepressant, it's working with your serotonin levels. When the doctor tells you have hormonal imbalance, this is what they're referring to. They are saying you're not producing enough serotonin. So the medical industry's solution is to create a drug which blocks the reabsorption of serotonin into the brain, called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs. This allows more serotonin to be available for use. There are multiple problems with SSRIs, including possible liver damage, which could inhibit the body from being able to eliminate toxins. Another issue with SSRIs is that patients can develop a condition called tachyphylaxis, which is basically a word used to describe the body's resistance to antidepressants. So an antidepressant may work initially, and then over time, it will stop working. There are many hypotheses for why this is, but we don't have the exact scientific explanation at this point. The consequence of this is that depression and anxiety can resurface at any time, and the patient may have to keep going back and have their medication adjusted and be constantly shifting drug protocols. This is why a more holistic solution for anxiety and depression is so much better. If lifestyle changes and supplements can boost your serotonin production in the gut, then you don't need an inhibitor to keep it from being reabsorbed. Therefore, having a healthy gut is essential to maintaining a healthy mind. That's why diseases of the mind have a correlation with diseases of the gut. What you eat is affecting your mental health. You see, what you eat has a direct effect on your gut lining.
It's interesting because you ask the question as far as how is the gut and the brain potentially related, and actually they are very closely related. In fact, there are nerve connections that go directly between the brain, especially the emotional part of the brain, and the gut, and that's why you get that gut feeling, right? And what's very interesting is there's more information that's being transmitted from your gut to your brain than the other way around. So our guts do talk to us. And so what that means is even on a subconscious level, depending on what we ingest in our food and how we're digesting, and even the microbiome, in other words, the bacteria that reside in our gut, all of those things are going to influence how our gut is talking to our brain, whether it's sending us happy signals or whether it's sending us distress signals, which can then in turn trigger things like anxiety and irritability and dysphoria or depression.
The important thing to understand about this is your brain, okay, where 80% of your central nervous system is between your ears, okay? It's in your brain. 80% of your central nervous system in your brain only produces about 12%, 10 to 12% of the necessary dopamine and serotonin that your nervous system requires. Okay? Your spinal cord produces some, but about 85% of the dopamine created and manufactured in our body is manufactured in our gut. Okay? You have 100 billion neurons in your brain. Okay? You have 200 billion neurons in your gut. Okay? And so if the gut isn't healthy, if there's leaky gut, if there's IBS, if there's SIBO, if there's acid reflux, if there's constipation, if there's diarrhea, if there's, you name it, all the gallbladder issues, okay? There's all of these different things are going to disrupt your body's capacity to produce dopamine and serotonin, okay? So if it doesn't produce dopamine correctly, you lose your drive to really do much, okay? If it's faulty, so it's hit and miss, okay? Sometimes it produces, sometimes it doesn't. You'll almost have that manic depressive, so you be manic when you have too much dopamine, and then when that runs out, your supply's gone. You drop down below normal and you're depressed. So that can be a factor. And the other thing, there's eating disorders are connected to dopamine, because dopamine not only is our driving force to survive hormone, it's our satisfaction hormone. Okay, so if the only way we can get some satisfaction is by eating, we become addicted to food. Okay, and we have to find other ways to get satisfaction. We got to heal our gut so it's producing enough dopamine. Then we have in the gut, if we're not producing serotonin. Well, serotonin is what makes us happy. And so if the gut is all these gut factors, diarrhea, constipation, irritable bowel, leaky gut, SIBO, gallbladder issues, Crohn's, all of these different gut disorders, right, directly affect both the quantity and the quality of serotonin that's produced in our gut. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so think about this. You can, this is something that happens is if our body has a dysfunctional environment in it, okay? A dysfunctional environment would be a swollen, inflamed environment, okay? A body that's swollen, inflamed, is going to be highly reactive. The immune system's going to be on alarm at all times, but the tissue in all of our organs, okay, in someone that's severely inflamed, the tissue in their body is going to be a rough place for things to survive properly. Okay, so things like hormones in a swollen, inflamed person can be denatured in the environment of their body. Okay, so the thyroid produces all the right hormones, correct? But as they're floating around through the bloodstream and going off into the tissues, the environment's so bad, it denatures that hormone and it doesn't work right. So when they get a lab test, they have all the thyroid hormones they ever wanted. Everything's normal, right? But they have every symptom you can imagine of an underactive thyroid. Okay, same thing happens with dopamine and serotonin. They're hormones also. They're hormone neurotransmitters. And so even if your brain is producing enough and so on and so forth, if you have a body that's inflamed, what's produced in the gut gets denatured by the time it gets to your brain. So the gut irritation feeds inflammation in our body. And so it's something that we have to deal with anyways if we're going to ever get ahead of inflammation in our body. We got to heal the gut to begin with. And if we want enough serotonin and dopamine, we have to heal our gut.
I've been talking about leaky gut for 15 years, and it now finally seems like the 100th monkey has been reached. Thank goodness. Because leaky gut is a very real problem. And when you have leaky gut, we think about our digestive system and elimination system. We think about it being part of our bodies. And it is and it isn't. It's kind of like the plumbing in our house. When you go to use the bathroom and you do your business and you flush the toilet, you don't want to see it again, right? It goes through the pipes, it exits, and it goes somewhere, wherever it goes. We don't, want to talk about that. But it leaves the house and it's gone. Same thing with the plumbing, our digestive system in our bodies. We eat, I'm sure you eat nutritious, healthy food. It goes down the esophagus, goes to the stomach, goes in the small intestine. The good stuff is absorbed, you get the nutrients out of it, and the toxins and the waste products are voided out and we never see it again. That's how it's supposed to be. But when you get a thing called leaky gut, what happens is this plumbing gets little gaps in between the cells. Now, you may not know this, but your stomach lining is 1 cell deep. It's very thin. And things that can cause leaky gut and cause gaps in the cells, these little patches here. Think about a hose that you're squirting your flowers with the water. And if you were to take an ice pick and start going through up and down the hose and making puncture things in here, the water starts to spew out, okay? That's what we see, if you can get a visual of that, with leaky gut. So now this food that's supposed to be digested and come into the small intestine and into the large intestine, the good nutritious part of that is supposed to be reabsorbed and the bad stuff is supposed to go out. When you have leaky gut though, you're literally mixing poop with your bloodstream. Sounds kind of gross. It is kind of gross. And this sets up this incredibly toxic environment that triggers reactions from the body, because normally when you're digesting your food, your body knows what to do with this food stuff that's been broken down in these little bitty particles, and it goes through the pipes, But if you've got leaky gut, some of this food stuff leaks across and gets into the body, some of this waste material. And the body overreacts, it releases bradykinins, histamines, leukotrienes, these inflammatory chemicals that set up these allergic reactions. Now, leaky gut and allergic reactions are the great masqueraders. They can basically cause just about anything, whether that's anxiety, depression, pain. They can cause fatigue. They can cause irritable bowel syndrome. They can cause all sorts of havoc in the body. One of the things that we see that impacts anxiety is elevated histamine levels. And we know that folks that have elevated histamine levels, they have a tendency to be more anxious. So if you've got leaky gut and your body's generating histamine as an allergic reaction, that sets up this whole cascade of biochemical reactions that can trigger anxiety. It can make you more susceptible to that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, this chemical imbalance, because when I was younger, I was actually diagnosed with ADD and went to a psychologist And then they referred me to a psychiatrist, and they gave me, mood altering medication. And I remember just absolutely hating it. But that's all they ever talked about is, this is helping to balance the chemicals in your body. And for whatever reason, it just never really jived with me that that's what it is, right? Like, it's a chemical imbalance in your body. And it's like, well, how does taking a, synthetic chemical supposed to balance our chemicals? Like, we have 100,000 chemical reactions happening every second in our body, and we're supposed to be like outsmarting it. I feel like our body's the greatest pharmacist on the world, in that aspect. So I'm not really sure what the right answer is. Is it actually a chemical imbalance or not? And in that aspect, I always like to look at the fact of, like, what can you do to feel better? What can you do to heal? And the digestive tract, just like you mentioned, Jonathan, so important. Heal the gut, you can heal the brain. If you have a leaky gut or intestinal permeability issues in your gut, you're gonna have a leaky brain. And those are just asking for, health issues. So really focusing on the gut, which is a foundation of healing autoimmune conditions and autoimmune disorders. And it's also a foundation too to have a healthy brain, and also a healthy foundation for happiness, joy, right? Having these emotions that we should exhibit daily, being grateful and just love, versus the, fear and loneliness and depression and these other, quote unquote emotions.
So the question that comes up is, what is causing so many gut issues in America and other Western countries? Why do so many people have chronic digestive problems? As a society, we're being exposed to things that we have never before encountered. Well, we can look at agriculture and find at least part of the answer. With an incredible increase in herbicides and pesticides over the last 80 years or so, chronic disease rates have escalated as well. So while we're living longer with modern healthcare interventions and sanitation regulations, we're also living with more chronic illnesses than ever before. Also, with the introduction of genetically modified organisms in 1994, we entered into a whole unexplored frontier. Since the longest feeding safety studies conducted by companies that create GMOs are 90-day toxicology studies, we're limited in our knowledge of the long-term effects of GMOs and their potential to create birth defects and gut-related illness. We know that pesticides and herbicides play a role, but could GMOs be causing leaky gut? Could they be affecting the gut lining? Two ominous statements were actually made by GMO advocates Amanda Lang and Kevin O'Leary on their Canadian Business News television series. When the pair had 14-year-old teen activist Rachel Parent on the show, she was discussing the need for long-term safety studies, and O'Leary countered by saying, "We're in a long-term study. You're eating genetically modified foods whether you like it or not." To which his co-host Amanda Lang added, "We're the lab rats." While these hosts didn't seem to see the glaring atrocity of their statements, it is clearly a dangerous endeavor to make the public the guinea pigs for health safety studies, especially when we do not even have transparent labeling concerning GMOs. In fact, the United States Senate has repeatedly decided against GMO labeling here in America. Why? This makes sense with what we've learned about the correlation between the food industry and government agencies that are supposed to be in place to protect our health. The real question for GMO producers is, what are they afraid of? If GMOs are safe, as they claim, and they stand behind their products, why do they feel the need to hide the fact that these products are in our foods? Why not have transparency and clear GMO labeling policies? Again, much like pharmaceuticals, GMOs have to alter the plants at a molecular level in order to receive a patent. These patents allow GMO companies to sue anyone who is in possession of their patented seed, even if the seed was carried by means of wind or surface water and cross-contaminated with another field. The owner of that field may not know that his crop has been contaminated with a patented seed. Yet, if it's been discovered that this has happened, GMO companies have been known to bring lawsuits and fees against their farmers. This allows big agriculture GMO businesses to create a near monopoly on certain crops, such as soy and corn. Again, we find ourselves somewhat at the mercy of a corrupt and greedy system. So we need to learn what choices we can make in order to combat the possible damage being done to our health by corporate America. We want to heal our guts and our minds, so let's seek to understand more about the science behind this.
Dr. Newsom, my big question is with our guts being so torn up to create such epidemic levels of depression, anxiety, and other mental diseases, illnesses, essentially, what have we done to destroy our health so badly?
Oh.
Our guts and our minds so badly.
Have you ever sprayed Roundup on a dandelion?
Yeah.
Okay. You ever seen someone,
Yeah, I've seen it.
dandelions after they sprayed the, eating food that has Roundup in it does to your gut what Roundup does to a dandelion. If that gives you an idea. Okay. So imagine the inside of your gut, all nice and healthy. You got little fingers, they're called villi, on the inside of your gut. You consume food with a glyphosate with Roundup in it, okay? That glyphosate goes in and just shrivels up dries those villi right out, okay? Immediately, as that happens, guess what you have?
Right.
Leaky gut, okay? Because those villi are where you're supposed to absorb all your nutrients, okay? The moment they shrivel up, now you got this one big spot where you start absorbing things. And so instead of having a really tight-knit membrane that only allows little things, very small and minute things to get through, you've wore that membrane off. And now you have this membrane that it isn't sifting. It's just kind of a membrane that's keeping stuff in and letting more stuff come in. So your innards don't seep out through your gut. Okay. And so there's one. And so what foods would that have? GMO foods. If you're eating GMO, the reason they genetically modify it is it's so they can use these types of herbicides on them. Okay? They genetically modify the food so they can use these herbicides on the soil around the plant that they're growing, and it doesn't kill the plant. Okay? So when we eat those things, it causes this shriveling of our gut inside. Okay? That's one.
Now, what are the genetically modified foods that are on the market?
Your primary are soy, corn, things, papayas. Non-organic papayas are almost always genetically modified. They even have different types of meats, crab meats, and there's genetically modified salmon on the market. There's genetically modified potatoes, tomatoes, and almost quite a few of your nightshade, which are in most cultures, your nightshade families are tomatoes, peppers, potatoes. they're all staple foods. So from all these different cultures, those are the they're staple foods. They're things that you have, people have their meat and potatoes. Or they have mashed potatoes at Thanksgiving, okay, or they have, you get into Hispanic culture. What Hispanic doesn't eat tomatoes or peppers?
What about wheat?
Wheat, there we go. Wheat's another one.
Is it? Because people say that it's not.
Here's what they do with wheat. This is the practice, okay? They plant wheat, okay, and to speed up harvest and make it easier to harvest, they'll spray it 2 or 3 times with glyphosate to dry up the wheat, which makes it easier for them to cut it and harvest it. Okay, it kills the wheat, it kills the plant. Okay, this is non-GMO wheat. Okay, they'll spray it with glyphosate to dry it out so it's easy to harvest. Okay, so then if you're eating non-GMO wheat and you got irritable bowel, you got all these gut issues anytime you eat wheat, was it the wheat or was it the glyphosate?
Yeah.
Okay.
So besides the antibiotics, now we've got pesticides. These pesticides are proven to kill bacteria. That's what they do. They kill fungus, they kill bacteria in your body. So they go in and they wipe out good gut bacteria as well. We'll see there's been a rise in all kinds of diseases in the 20th century just from chlorine. Chlorine wiped out a lot of diseases, but it created new diseases because chlorine also kills bacteria. Drinking chlorine all the time, breathing it in your showers, that also affects the bacteria in your body. Then you see pesticides, and then you've got the GMOs that are proven to actually, those foods have pesticides in them. They have Roundup in it, which will kill good bacteria, but it also has the effect, and they've seen this in scans, of opening the intestines up so that you get leaky gut syndrome. So your undigested food comes in because you haven't fully digested it and just leaks into your bloodstream. Once it's into your bloodstream, because it's not fully digested, your body thinks it's an invader and triggers an autoimmune response. And so what we see now is this huge increase in autoimmune diseases in the last century, just gone up off the chart. Certainly people often think, oh, we're so much healthier now. That's nonsense. People who lived on farms and didn't have exposure to all of the germs of living in a city have lived from 80 to 100 years healthy at 100. This was common in the old days where people didn't live in cities. But once you lived in cities, you have all the toxicity of people living together in the feces and the urine and all that, and germs. And so you get the imbalance. But today, the drugs we take, the side effects of drugs, every single drug you take over the counter or prescribed is going to kill some good bacteria in your gut. It's also going to damage your liver. These are the side effects of taking drugs. Look at the long list of them, even the over-the-counter stuff. So we're inundating ourselves with things that are interfering with healthy gut.
Apart from that, we have chemical things that are going on in the body that will produce both anxiety and depression. One of the most common things is, today people's digestion is just a mess. I'll give you an example. They take the sausage industry in the United States. Okay, we don't use, pig intestine would be what you normally use for sausage, correct? Okay, your pigs here in the United States, they can't use the intestinal material from pigs in the United States to make sausage. Reason being is the GMO food that the GMO soy and GMO corn that they're feeding pigs in feedlots are causing such a thinning in their intestines. Their intestines are literally thinning, so the amount of cells deep are thick that their intestines would normally be is reducing and reducing and reducing, and they can't pack anything into those intestines. They just burst open. Also, pigs, a large amount of pigs in feedlots being fed GMO corn, GMO soy, have to be slaughtered before their intestines rupture and they bleed out. Okay, so I'm telling you this because if you're eating the standard American diet, you're eating GMO soy and you're getting GMO corn. It's in the foods, just in regular food. If it's doing that to pigs, guess what it's doing to you? Okay, that is damaging your digestive system and causing the intestinal wall to thin. Now, as that happens, it's easier and easier to develop what we call leaky gut. And leaky gut is where the intestinal wall gets inflamed and it swells up and the tissues separate and they become more permeable. So instead of being tightly knit like this and only small things can get through, they swell up and bigger particles can float through the gut. That's what we call leaky gut. Okay, leaky gut leads to autoimmune disorders. It leads to immunodeficiency. It leads to food allergies. It leads to environmental allergies. It leads to chemical sensitivities. There's anything inflammatory. Okay, leaky gut will lead to inflammation in your body. Period. So with the digestive tract being tore up and irritated the way it is, we got to remember that 85% of the serotonin and the dopamine that your body produces is produced in your gut. Okay, if the gut is not healthy, an impairment in the production of those two hormones occurs. Okay, so those two hormones, their production gets messed up, and not only their production, but the consistency of the production of those hormones gets messed up, quote unquote, messed up, a real medical term here. But when that happens, you may get a surge of dopamine without enough serotonin, or you may get a surge of serotonin without enough dopamine, or you don't get enough of either, or you get too much of both happening because of the dysfunction in the gut.
So let's be clear, genetically modified organisms. So the grain companies, Monsanto, Archer Daniels Midland, these big companies are putting pesticides and chemicals genetically, putting them in the genes of the plants, so that the intent is that bugs will eat them less or die when they eat them and not reproduce. The problem with that is we're a big bug. And so we eat that, and it's toxic to us too. And so we're taking poisons in our body. If you're eating GMO, if whatever you're buying doesn't say non-GMO in it, I'll virtually guarantee you that you're eating pesticides or chemicals that are designed to kill animals. Bugs are animals. And can I say it's not healthy for us? I mean, that would be a gross understatement. So when you consume a GMO, not only is it killing part of you, but it's killing off your gut biome, which is critical. You have to understand that we are parasites. The numbers vary, but it's about 10-to-1 ratio. So if there's 1 trillion of our cells, we have 10 trillion bacteria in our gut and on us. So we're actually a parasite off of their byproducts. So you want to have healthy bacteria. You take these GMO foods or you take an antibiotic and it kills off those beneficial bacteria that are making products that you need to live a healthy life. So that's where probiotics come in, trying to regenerate that. That's where I was talking about nicotinamide riboside, trying to regenerate the mitochondria, which for all intents and purposes are intracellular bacteria. So antibiotics are great if you have a life-threatening bacterial infection, but as physicians, we tend to just pass those out like candy. More of a pacifier a lot of times because, okay, this will just run its course, but mother brought kid in and she needs to be reinforced that she needs to come to the doctor and she wants to leave with something, so let's just write an antibiotic. And that's disastrous healthcare, and it has been devastating to us physically, to our gut biome, because then you don't get immunity. We clearly know that now. If we intervene with an antibiotic, your body doesn't create immunity to that bacteria, that virus. So these are not healthy things for us to be taking on a regular basis.
When we're talking about GMOs, we need to understand what they are. Some people think it means God move over, but GMO actually means genetically modified organism. And GMOs have been promoted as a solution to world hunger, that they would lead to more drought-resistant crops and bigger yields, that they would lead to better nutrition and flavor and less pesticide consumption. But in reality, they haven't accomplished any of those things. What the vast majority of the GMOs on the market today have done is one or both of two things. Number one, they are pesticide producers, which means they produce the insecticide Bt in every cell of the plant. So if certain bugs take a bite, their stomachs split open and they die. Number two is that they are herbicide resistant, which means you can spray them with Roundup or 2,4-D or certain other toxic herbicides, and they'll kill the weeds, but they won't kill the plant that we're growing. So now we are eating plants that are living pesticide factories. They produce pesticide in every cell of the plant. And we're eating plants that have been sprayed with herbicides. Now Roundup is a probable carcinogen. The state of California declares that it is known to cause cancer. It's linked to a lot of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and other cancer cases. And it's also an endocrine disruptor. And it's an antibiotic. Monsanto actually patented it as an antibiotic. So we know that it can impact gut bacteria. We are now eating large amounts of glyphosate. In the United States alone, we spray about 300 million pounds of it on our crops every year, about a pound for every American. And that's going directly on the food that we're eating. So what's the impact of all this glyphosate? Well, we don't exactly know because we're all kind of like guinea pigs in an uncontrolled mass experiment. But we do know that since glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, has been being sprayed on our croplands, we've seen a dramatic rise in rates of depression, as well as autism and ADHD, and all sorts of other health problems that we're facing today. Now, we've also seen a big rise in the Chinese GDP and all kinds of other metrics. Correlation doesn't equal causation, but when you see a correlation this strong, and you recognize that there is a lot of data showing that this herbicide could be toxic to human beings, then you've got to wonder, is there a connection? And I, for one, want to steer clear of the foods that have been sprayed with glyphosate because I don't want to eat that stuff. So how do you avoid it? If you want to steer clear of glyphosate and GMOs in general, go organic is the best way to go because certified organic foods are non-GMO and are not sprayed with glyphosate. You can get foods that are certified non-GMO, and in the case of corn, soy, cotton, which is used for cottonseed oil, canola, and sugar, specifically sugar beets, you can, those are the crops that you want to particularly avoid if you're wanting to avoid GMOs. But glyphosate and Roundup are being used as a desiccant now on particularly the wheat harvest, but also barley and oats and a few other crops, staple crops, cereal crops on a large scale, to dry out the crop before harvest. So with all of those crops, if you want to avoid glyphosate, you now have to go organic.
Another part of the puzzle of what may be causing the rise in gut-related illnesses is the increased use of antibiotics. This problem goes beyond what is prescribed to people by their doctor, since farm animals are dosed with high levels of antibiotics from birth. The runoff from these farms where these animals are often housed often create contaminants in our water sources. So the water we drink may contain antibiotics without us even realizing it. So if we're eating meat and dairy and also consuming contaminated water, we are taking in antibiotics without even knowing it. So what's the harm in this? Don't antibiotics save lives? Well, the original discovery of antibiotics was groundbreaking, and it did help curb many infections that would have otherwise been known to kill people at the time. However, poor sanitation was also to blame, and simple sanitation laws have helped to quell many of these infections. While antibiotics may still have their place, the overuse of them has caused antibiotic-resistant bacteria, or superbugs, such as MRSA. However, the real issue is much deeper than this. Recent scientific studies have begun to uncover the gut microbiome. There is a delicate balance of bacteria and other microbes in the gut that is beneficial and essential to human health. Many of these antibiotics, while eliminating the bad bacteria that is causing an infection, can also wipe out the good bacteria that is keeping your digestive system working properly and your immune system functioning at an optimal capacity. So you can see how annihilating these beneficial microbes can be detrimental on your overall health. Balancing this important microbiome is essential for healthy serotonin production as well. In a study published in the scientific journal Cell in 2016, this correlation between the gut microbiota and serotonin production was firmly established. This is groundbreaking science that we did not have up until recently. Why isn't this being broadcast nationwide in a society that is rampant with depression and anxiety? In a society where mood-related disorders are on the rise and suicidal rates are increasing. Our society has become so reliant on conglomerate systems to tell us what is healthy for us, while these very same corporations are the ones seeking to make us sick and keep us that way for their own profit. So our goal here is to give you a better understanding of these things so you can take back control of your own health and your mental well-being.
Well, what basically happens is we've got a lot of things attacking us now. We've got, if you've done antibiotics, they've wiped out some of the good strains of probiotics in your gut. Literally, there's real estate in your gut. There's 7 pounds, 6, 7 pounds of microbiome of this bacteria in your gut. And there really isn't, to a certain extent, no bad bacteria. It's just that when we add antibiotics, you suddenly destroy parts of your microbiome. And the most hardy parts of the microbiome are often candida. So they're like the weeds in the garden. So you got the candida, the antibiotics that come in and knock out your plants and knock out the weeds. But the weeds grow back. You know, they're like super. Then you've got antibiotics that go in and cause the gut dysbiosis. Every microbe, your gut is necessary for brain function. Brain function is necessary for nervous system function, immune function, and so forth. So it regulates. But what was discovered in 2017 is that for every microbe in the brain, there are 7 to 9 microbes necessary to make that, I'm sorry, for every neuron in the brain, there's 7 or 9 microbes that circle around it to make it work. They work synergistically. We didn't know this before. We thought the brain was sterile. But no, the gut produces those microbes which are necessary for your brain to function efficiently. So the gut and the brain are so intimately related, and we're just wiping out our gut with the antibiotics, which sometimes can save lives, but we can then replenish ourselves with the wide spectrum of probiotics. If you take a lot of the probiotics you buy, say, oh, there's so many, but it's just of 3 strains. You know, there's basically 3 strains in most of them. You want to get the broad spectrum one, 17, 26, 32, 42 is my favorite. You know, that's the Bravo probiotics. That's what I make for my family.
Pesticides is the next thing that we get exposed to. Pesticides are, in essence, antibiotics. So if you're eating pesticide-rich food, you're getting the same effect on your gut as if you're taking an antibiotic. Anybody out there that's taken an antibiotic, you know, just think of what that did to your gut. Well, if you're eating food laden with pesticides, those pesticides are having that same effect on your gut. And it may not happen, you know, an antibiotic's, you know, concentrated chemical, right? And you take a tablet or a capsule, you have a little, you know, little pink liquid that you drink, you know what I mean? Those are the types of delivery systems that they have for antibiotics, right? In food, it's an accumulative effect, okay? So a little dose 3 times a day is a big dose every week. And it's even bigger dose every month, an even bigger dose every year. You know what I'm saying? And so that accumulative effect does damage on your gut. And so we got herbicides, we got GMOs, we got pesticides, then we have medication. You know, medication's another real irritant to the gut. It's a lot of medications, in order to be strong enough to have the therapeutic effect that they have, those medications have to create side effects. They're so powerful. You know, a medication that's so powerful to regulate your blood pressure, okay, I can't do that without, you know, without having some sort of side effect. It's going to have to irritate something somewhere.
I just want to share what this has done for my life. The reason I didn't know all the science behind all of this. You know, I've traveled around as a documentary filmmaker. We travel around putting seminars about health. I now put on a seminar. We, you know, have a DVD seminar on the gut-brain connection. The reason why I got into all of this is because I lived in a foreign country for a year, and I got stomach trouble while I was there from the water. We knew it was from the water, and it lasted the entire year we were there. Then came back to the States. I mean, my wife went to a doctor in that country, and nothing really helped there. And then we came back to the States, and for a whole nother year, so 2 solid years, I had stomach trouble. And for the first time in my life, I experienced what they call seasonal depression, or seasonal affective disorder. And so I experienced that. And then I experienced it every year for 8 years. So every year I would have depression in the winter. And I exercised, I ate healthy. I was actually eating a largely plant-based diet by that point already. After 8 years of this, then I got bit by a tick, and a friend of mine, a doctor friend, said, well, you should just take some antibiotics just to be cautious. So I took some antibiotics, and then I went into depression year-round. And I didn't know that the science shows that, yes, that this increases your chances of depression by 25%. 1 round, 2 to 5 rounds, 50%. I didn't know that. So I fell into depression year-round. And then for 2 solid years, I was totally depressed. But I continued going forward. I was making documentary films, traveling the world, teaching people about various things, the Bible, about health. And as far as I had tons of energy, I exercised all the time, I drank adequate amounts of water and all of these things. But what ended up happening was I ended up just trying something. And I went to a biblical plant-based diet like Adam and Eve were on. And so I was actually eating a lot of fruit, and I didn't know the science behind it at that point. I just tried it. And as I tried it within 2 weeks, and the interesting thing was I started about 2 weeks before January 1st. So right around midway through December, I started eating just tons of fruit, began to eat this way, very, very simple food. And 2 weeks later, which was about January 1st. So if you're struggling with seasonal depression, this should be about the worst time. And 2 weeks into this, right about January 1st, for the first time in 2 years, I could choose where to focus my thoughts. Because many times when someone's depressed, they have these constant repetitive or negative or guilty thoughts. And I was having this over and over and over. I'd wake up every morning. My very first thought would just be a depressing thought. You just hope you'd wake up one morning with that not the case. But then after 2 weeks of eating this way, eating significant amounts, many pieces of fruit, many pieces of vegetables after a while. First, I just started with fruit. The depression began to subside within 2 weeks. And it has been such a blessing for me. I've had the opportunity to travel the world now teaching people on this. We teach it in a seminar. Just some time ago, I was in a foreign country and I had shared to medical students on this. And then I visited that country again just a few months ago. And one of the doctors came along and he wanted to share. He said, I've implemented the things that you've talked about. And he said, it has been such a blessing. He too had been struggling with depression. But as he began to implement these things also, he too began to find similar results, that the depression began to subside.
What causes leaky gut? Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, certain pain medications, certain antidepressants, yeast overgrowth, antibiotics. Now, yeast overgrowth, everybody's got yeast. Everybody's got yeast in your intestinal tract, this fungus. And normally that yeast is kept in check by good bacteria. So there's more good bacteria in our intestinal tract than bad bacteria, and it keeps it in check. But when we take antibiotics kill the good and the bad bacteria, which then can set up yeast overgrowth. Now, once the yeast starts to overgrow the intestinal tract, like octopus, it sends out these tentacles that attach to the cellular wall, and they can punch holes in the wall and create this environment called leaky gut.
The awareness on microbiome has really boosted in the last 2 years. Oh, but what's fascinating is we're still in the Stone Age, because what's happening is like people are just like, oh cool, they just keep eating their sad American diet, right? Standard American diet, and then just drinking the odd kombucha, and it's like, oh, but this is not the answer. And you could do without things like kombucha. They're great, but they're not the answer. What the answer really is plants. I mean, it's natural, and fermented foods are great. And I was just eating some sauerkraut a moment ago, right? Yeah. So I'm into it. I'm sold. Right. But I'm aware that we're not necessarily going to be eating sauerkraut every meal. But when we are eating fresh fruit and vegetables every meal, we're able to replenish the microbiome. Can you tell me how that works?
Right. Oh yes.
Our microbiome, like even mine right now, I need work, right? I know that. And because of other issues, like I've had parasites, I've had some things come in, destroy microbiome, come wreak havoc. And so I'm doing that rebuilding. And I've been eating essentially quite a good plant-based diet as best as I've known, right? But I'm improving that. But how is it that people can replenish their gut bacteria by eating plant-based diets?
First off, the fibers in fruits and vegetables are all prebiotic substances. So all your probiotics need the fibers, the cellulose and things like that, that's in the fruits and vegetables that you would eat, okay? That's food for your good bugs, okay? That's what they eat. And so if you're not, okay, so you're taking, you're eating a standard American diet, but you're taking a probiotic every day. What you're doing is taking troops and sending them, to Mars without spacesuits. Okay, you're sending them into a hostile environment that's going to kill them as soon as they get there. Okay, and some people will actually have problems taking. They take a probiotic and it makes them not feel well. Okay, or they'll eat fermented food and they don't feel well. Okay, that's what's happening in those cases most often is that you're not introducing enough troops, and so they go down and there's just enough of them to start a ruckus, and the other bugs down there destroy everything. And so what happens, you get this upset stomach and you get all irritated, but it's because there's a ruckus going on down there. Okay, and so your probiotics aren't doing what you need them to do because they have no food. Okay, if you're eating the standard American diet doesn't have fruits and vegetables in it. You know, they have French fries.
Mm-hmm. You know, yeah, the key is that they're nuked, right?
French fries and ketchup. That's right. Yeah,
it's tomatoes. Everything is there, but it's nuked.
It's been nuked. Exactly. And your good microbes in your gut can't survive on that. Okay, they need real fruits and vegetables, not GMO fruits and vegetables. They need real fruits and vegetables that have real nutrients. Okay, and they need that fiber in those fruits and vegetables. And so if you're not eating your vegetables, you're not feeding your microbiome. And if you're eating pesticide and herbicide and preservative contaminated foods, you're actually consuming things that are destroying your microbiome. You're killing your microbiome when you eat. Okay? And you can try to replenish that, but if you don't give the probiotics that you're putting down the chute, if you don't give them food to eat, they can't survive. Just like if they dropped us off on the moon, we're not going to survive. You know, it's not the right environment. So, without a nurtured, a nourishing environment, you can take all the probiotics you want, but they're not going to give you a whole lot of benefit. And I love probiotics. I formulate probiotics. We grow them. We do all kinds of things with probiotics, but they have to have a food source. They're living beings. If you don't feed them, they die.
Got it. Wow, incredible. So supplements are great only when they're in collaboration with a good diet.
And so restoring the gut biome is critically important. And truthfully, there aren't many good probiotics out there. Most of them are lactobacillus and bifidus, whereas there's over 1,000 different bacteria in our bowel. And so we want diversity of bowel bacteria there. So eating things without washing them to death, without cleaning them to death, go out and eat a little dirt, like you did when you were a kid to help increase your gut biome. We can be too clean. We can absolutely be too clean. So taking care of that gut biome. So I'm not against anything medical. I'm just against the wrong use. We pass out antibiotics like candy. It is not healthy for us. Antibiotics can and should be used at critical moments. If you have sepsis, if you have this overwhelming disease, if you have this methicillin, but we can use other things. We can use ozone, we can use hydrogen peroxide, we can use natural herbal agents that kill bacteria, oregano. There's a lot of great herbs that help kill. We can use silver. There's many things that kill bacteria that we can't use because they're not FDA approved. But we can certainly use them at home. We can use them outside of the hospital. So antibiotics, okay, when we're critical, we absolutely have to have them, yes. But other times, randomly, doctors prescribe them for a cold. Well, we know that colds are viruses, and we know that antibiotics don't kill viruses. So there's kind of an insanity going on out there with our use of antibiotics, and they're very destructive. They cause a lot of disease.
We look at a massive study in the journal Pediatrics. This was a study of 2 million babies over the course of 35 years. So this is massive. And what they discovered is that babies who are born by a C-section have higher levels of asthma, bowel disorders, rheumatism, and even leukemia. And now, why? I mean, you think, who cares? I mean, you pulled out this way or that way, one or the other, right? But here's the thing. God created us when we're in the, the womb, we might say, that we're in an environment with very few bacteria. There are some that are maybe swallowed, that they take in, but in general, they're in an area with not very many bacteria. And when the child is born or going through the birth canal, we should say, as they're passing through, they begin to be inoculated. They begin to be covered with the bacteria from their mother. And that is exactly the bacteria that they generally need to enhance their immune system, potentially for the rest of their life. But if we go about it another way and that baby is, cut out through an incision and removed by the doctor, the doctor then maybe from his glove gives that baby its first bacteria. Other bacteria maybe begins to come from the hospital around them. And just guess which one, or guess which bacteria would be better for that baby. And you can quite imagine it's that which came from its mother. One of the questions might be, well, how do we get a greater diversity of gut bacteria so that we can be happier, social, and more outgoing? Well, before we go any further with that, I want you to think about this. So we know that toddlers who have less diversity of gut bacteria are more cranky, more antisocial. They're just not as happy children. The same thing is true later in life. They found the same thing with alcoholics. They found that alcoholics specifically, who had less diversity of gut bacteria, found it harder to overcome their addictions to alcohol. This is amazing. Do you think about that? That could you actually be struggling with addiction because of lack of diversity of gut bacteria? Now, this is a fascinating concept. Now, as the scientists looked at it, they looked at a group of alcoholics, and they found that the ones with greater diversity of gut bacteria found less anxiety, less depression, and less craving for their alcohol. So we might want to ask them, how can I get more good bacteria in my gut? The idea is, I could just kill it off with a bunch of antibiotics. What's fascinating about that is every time you take a round of antibiotics, you go to the doctor and they say, go through this round of antibiotics. It'll take you, 2 weeks, 10 days, whatever it is. That's a round of antibiotics. Every time you take a round of antibiotics, it increases your chances of depression by about 25%. And for every 2 to 5 rounds that you take, it increases your chances of depression by right around 50%. So this may be another factor. We already know that children who don't have as much diversity of bacteria, they're not as happy. Same thing with adults. Now, why? Now, could it be that this bacteria actually, we know partly why. We know part of the mystery of it all is that this bacteria helps us to digest our food, and good food, healthy food, like, fiber-filled food, which is only found in the plant kingdom, by the way. There's no fiber in the animal kingdom. But when you eat plant-based foods, you get bacteria. Your body can't digest this fiber. When you eat fiber, your body can't digest fiber, but the bacteria in your gut can digest the fiber. And what it does is it lets off a byproduct called short-chain fatty acids, which lower levels of inflammation, which will lower levels of chronic disease, but it also potentially could lower your levels of having depression or lower your chances of having depression.
So if you're struggling in this way, you may have symptoms like brain fog or digestive problems, burping, gas, pain in your stomach, bloating after a meal. You may struggle with just lack of mental clarity, feeling exhausted, feeling tired at 3 in the afternoon. That's not natural. None of those symptoms are natural. Those are all symptoms that are closely correlated with digestive problems. And the best way to shore up your digestion is to get lots of fiber, to get eat lots of fermented foods and probiotics, and also prebiotics, which tends to be certain forms of fiber that will help your body to make use of the probiotics that you consume. If you want to take some kind of supplement, that's great. If you want to eat things like yogurt, make sure it's not sugary sweetened, because a lot of the heavily sweetened fermented foods like yogurts and soy yogurts and coconut yogurts, if there's a lot of sugar in there, then you're actually feeding the bad guys. Because sugar in the digestive tract is a magnet for the bad bacteria that you actually don't want in your body. So we want the good stuff, and so fiber is one of the most critical things, and a whole foods plant-based diet is associated with healthy digestion. When you eat animal products, there are no animal products that contain any fiber. 0. So you just got to have more plants. And also, frankly, sugar has almost no fiber, oils have no fiber, and white flour and white rice have almost no fiber also. So again, it comes back to the whole foods plant-based diet for fiber and for also generally a lot of the nutrients. They're going to help restore your gut bacteria.
With leaky gut, the thing about leaky gut is it's definitely repairable. You know, it's definitely repairable, and it's something that if it's part as a step in the Murphy method of sleep, balancing the neurotransmitters, and then working on the gut, that's the next step. That's a big part of it. You got to get that corrected. If you don't, then you run the risk you're always generating this inflammation. Inflammation is the driver for everything, whether that's cancer, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't matter what it is, pain, anxiety, depression, brain on fire. You know, it doesn't matter when you're generating this inflammation. And a lot of people that I encounter that have problems with their GI system or have food allergies, once we start to fix the leaky gut, their food allergies, and I work with people that literally get down that all they can eat is rice. You know, they get that because they get so allergic. And it's not that they're having an allergic reaction to the foods so much as that anything they eat is being triggered. You know, the leaky gut is being, it compromises the ability to be able to break this down. And so they develop all these food allergies. And what I find is that once I start to fix the leaky gut with high doses or the right doses of L-glutamine, fish oil, bone broth, some of these things that actually heal up the gut, digestive enzymes that we talked about earlier, they'll see that now they can start to add these foods back that for months, maybe years, they could not do so.
See, there's a common misconception. People say you are what you eat, but it's actually more accurate to say you are what you digest. Some people are eating all the perfect foods, but they're not getting the nutrients from their food because their body isn't able to metabolize them. That's why you want to nourish your microbiome. So lots of fiber is really helpful, lots of vegetables. And then there are a few vegetables that are particularly good for digestive health. Well, we're talking about jicama, asparagus, hickory root, also onions, raw onions in particular, interestingly. Garlic also has a lot of beneficial properties. And controversially, because of course gluten is controversial, but wheat bran actually, and whole wheat, has a lot of prebiotic fiber. So for those people who aren't susceptible to wheat allergies, they may find that beneficial too. Bottom line is, feed the good guys, and they will take care of you for the rest of your life.
We need to address gut health. We can make the assumption that over 90% of the population has what we call leaky gut or gut dysbiosis. So while you are going to the vegan plant-based diet, we need to take advantage of that, and we need to add a couple of things in that can help heal the gut. Now, bone broth, even though if we're going to go vegan, we can use bone broth medicinally.
Yep.
Okay, so we can use bone broth to help heal the gut. We can use things like celery juice to help heal the gut. You could do a bone broth with celery to help heal the gut. This is actually just food-based. This is not any supplements at all. If we were to add supplements, we can do L-glutamine-based products. In some cases, with certain genetic mutations, if you try an L-glutamine-based product to help heal the gut and you start noticing a big increase in anxiety, typically 2 to 3 days you'll notice it, then it's probably a mutation in one of your genes, and so you don't want to take that. And that's where the lab testing helps us, because we can look at that and I'll know exactly what supplement. Do we want to put you on an L-glutamine based supplement to help heal your gut, or do we want to go with an alternative? But if you're doing this on your own, bone broth, celery juice are amazing to help heal the gut. You want to add a probiotic in there too. Taking a probiotic by itself without addressing the ecosystem of the gut isn't going to help heal your gut. That would be like trying to put tropical fish in a dead coral reef. They don't have an ecosystem in which to live. So you've got to rebuild the coral reef so that then so that the tropical fish and all of the life that belongs in the coral reef will have a place to live. And it's much the same with the gut. So when you're doing the bone broth and the celery juices or the L-glutamine products, that is going to help heal the gut. And then when you re-inoculate with the healthy bacteria, they actually have a place to live, and you'll actually start to feel the benefits. So if you have tried in the past to just take a probiotic and you weren't addressing the house in which the probiotic needs to live and you weren't noticing results, this is why.
Perfect, thank you. No, I love that. And I was just thinking as well, from some of the things that we've been looking at, bone broth can be helpful. And we looked at even people doing potato and carrot broth, which seemed to have some impact. So that was very interesting to me. I'm yet to see some people test it and tell me what kind of results they can get with it.
In the functional medicine world and in the healing the gut world, so much attention is brought to pounding down probiotics, eating fermented foods, all these things to get good bacteria in. But if you think about it, okay, let's say I have bad bacteria and I have good bacteria, and it's just not in balance. And I'm gonna pound probiotics, I'm gonna take fermented foods, and I'm gonna try to increase it. Well, we still have the bad there. And there's only so much real estate in the digestive tract. So one of the groundbreaking things that I figured out clinically was, okay, before we start putting bacteria into our body, what if we starve all the bacteria down, right? So we take the bad down, we starve the squatters down, we take even the good down, which maybe sounds a little worrisome right away here, but we starve all the bacteria down, and then we can then put good bacteria, fermented foods, and other things in. And now look at this ratio, right? So instead of just having kind of this ratio, now we can get more of this ratio. And what I've seen clinically, at least, people get healthier because of that. So when we're looking at protocols, like what can you do right now, we can start starving bacteria down. You can fast. You could fast, just water fast. Any type of fasting is going to starve bacteria down because it's not going to feed them. Pretty much most foods are going to feed bacteria to some degree. And then of course there's other gut issues like SIBO, S-I-B-O. Some people pronounce it SIBO, but small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where there's bacteria where it shouldn't be in the tract. And really the key with that as well is starving the bacteria down in the small intestine and then re-inoculating in the large intestine where the majority of bacteria is. So one of the good tools though is, if you're vegetarian or vegan, there's mineral broths. Just recently heard about like a potato broth as well too. So I think there's many options in that category, but if there's some type of broth, will actually help to starve all the bacteria down. It'll give you some minerals, where you don't become electrolyte deficient or anything like that. But then I also like to kind of pair up taking some type of like antimicrobial herbs, antimicrobial or antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal, because you want to kind of hit the whole category, right? Taking all the biomes down, and then let's eat some fermented foods. And if you have histamine issues or like mast cell activation, then maybe fermented like raw sauerkraut or kimchi or like a kefir, might not be the best for you, and then maybe more probiotics. But there's tons of bacteria in foods, like just a ton of them. So consuming fermented foods, taking probiotics is really a good way to then add that to that. And if there's any other problems, the missing link that I missed for years, even doing the starve bacteria down and then putting good stuff in, was parasites. So if you have loose stools, stomach rolls a lot, don't forget about the parasites.
So what can create the problem with anxiety and depression? One of those things is parasites. That's right, parasites. Can you believe that? I didn't believe that before, but as I personally went through this journey, I have found many times with not only myself, but plenty of other people. Gut health is related to brain health and happiness. So let's discuss a few things about parasites. One of the things is ammonia. Ammonia is a byproduct of parasites, which can cause brain fog, can cause depression and anxiety, even affect your sleep at night. Another issue, what we can see, is that they secrete enzymes which can inhibit GABA production. GABA is what helps bring us down from anxiety. So there's a couple of them, one called hookworms, schistosomiasis, another one called Toxoplasma gondii, toxoplasmosis, both of which inhibit the GAD enzyme, which means we can't convert glutamate to GABA, which then we are running at a high anxiety area. And we don't want to be there because anxiety is a way that causes so many problems with people. And in today's world, it's rampant. It does exist. Another thing is in our gut health, a lot of the bacteria can be affected by the byproduct, by so much of this ammonia. Why is that? Because it suppresses or kills the bacteria, creates a bad environment for it to exist. So then we don't have the right bacteria making the right nutrients that are then making the neurotransmitters and our happy, what we call happy hormones or happy proteins. So these parasites can sometimes overtake people. I've seen it over and over. That create chronic fatigue, that create chronic pain, that create just chronic feeling horrible, chronic illness. A lot of the chronic illness leads to depression and anxiety. And as we get energy back, as we clear these things out of people, man, it's amazing the transformation that happens. Let me give you an example. I had a gentleman that was really depressed. He had 4 kids. Actually, has 5 or 6 kids now. But at the time, it started there at that point. And we went through and evaluated what was going on, what was happening. Why wasn't he enjoying life? Why wasn't he engaging with his children? Well, in our treatments, he passed 4 6-foot tapeworms. That affected him. He had lived in Brazil for a couple years and probably was highly infected with tapeworms at that point in time. But those things exist here, yes, in the United States. We get exposure to these things. So that's one example. I've had many other examples of having that depression or the anxiety, not feeling well, not moving forward in life. And as we're able to get the proper nutrients in, because now absorption is allowed, parasites aren't taking all your food. They're not taking all your nutrients. They're not causing your chronic constipation that a lot of these people have, which they love to do so that they can take those nutrients from you. So that's one of the big tie-ins of parasites at this deeper level that we would never think of. They affect neurotransmitter function. They can cause seizures. They can cause depression and anxiety through their byproduct as well as through dampening down the production of your neurotransmitters.
I mean, what was it that was triggering these problems for him?
He had parasitic infections.
Yeah.
He had systemic inflammation. He had what we call leaky gut or gut dysbiosis. So he was having a lot of gut issues. And the gut issues were a huge cause of his brain chemistry imbalances. Mm-hmm. The foods that he was eating were also altering his brain chemistry. And that was a huge suspect for us, as well as the parasitic pattern that he was showing.
Got it.
And as we addressed all of these issues, the brain fog started to lift, and the memory issues started to go away, and the anxiety started to go away, and the depression started to go away.
Amazing. And okay, so you mentioned the parasite issue a couple of times now. Is it possible that the parasitic issue would actually be throwing off these numbers?
Oh, absolutely.
And how?
Absolutely, it does. Well, parasites or any type of pathogen or bug that's living in the body, they throw off endotoxins. So I don't know how to describe this. Yeah. So when you have pathogens that are in your body, which are basically bugs that don't belong, and that can be in a category of parasites, bacteria, virus, protozoa, fungus, whatever it is, they throw off toxins in the body, and those toxins can in turn cause huge neurotransmitter imbalances. For example, toxoplasma is a well-known toxin in the body that has actually caused people to commit suicide. And there are studies on that. So you can look up toxoplasma and suicide and you can see that. But what's unfortunate is that many people who have struggled with depression for many years were never tested for underlying infections to see if the infections could be the underlying cause of the neurotransmitter imbalances.
Got it.
Toxoplasma is a wonderful example because there are numerous studies showing the correlation between toxoplasma and the changes to the brain chemistry that lead to suicide.
Okay, wow. And toxoplasma, where does it come from?
Toxoplasma can come from various sources, but it's common amongst cats, I believe, as well.
Now the next thing that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it should, is parasites. Parasites have been implicated with a lot of toxicity issues and chronic infection. And the reason why is mold spores will live inside of parasites. Parasites are sponges for heavy metals. Parasite epidemic that's happening, and it's across the globe, it's happening in first world countries like the United States of America. Parasite epidemic is there because of the toxicity epidemic. Parasites are absorbing heavy metals, and the body's like, thank you, I'll allow you to be here. But now we get the downside and the toxicity that's produced, or the biotoxins that are produced from these parasites. So parasites absorb heavy metals. They're houses for mold spores. So even if you clean up your environment, remove the mold, you can still be dealing with mold illness because of parasites. And then the last piece is bacteria and viruses. Now, I mentioned earlier that chlamydia pneumoniae, Borrelia burgdorferi, herpes simplex virus 1 have all been implicated with brain conditions such as Alzheimer's, that these chronic infections can actually be contributing to these brain disorders. Well, these chronic infections will live inside of parasites. It's been well documented that Lyme disease will live safely within parasites. It's been documented that viruses will live safely within parasites. So when we're looking at protocol, we have to look at not only what the sources are, but we gotta make sure that we're nailing the order, that we're doing it in the right order. Otherwise, you're gonna hit a wall and you're gonna get frustrated. So drainage is first. Drainage comes along with you for the journey. Then we're getting to parasites, because pretty much parasites can house a lot of things. Don't miss out on clearing out parasites. You'll be amazed at the things that you see come out of you. I was eating dinner with a friend, Dr. Todd Watts, and he was showing me pictures of stuff that came out of people. And I'm like, what is that? And he's like, this is biofilm, these are parasites. I mean, this is just stuff that has literally been, bogging up colons and small intestines of these clients that I've been working with. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm giving them mimosa pudica seed. And I was like, what? Mimosa pudica seed, what's that? And I started taking it, and about 16, 17 days later my stomach started rolling. I started feeling like, this doesn't feel right. And the next thing you know, I go to the bathroom, I go to wipe, and I'm like, that didn't feel right. I look down, and there's these 2 roundworms hanging out of me into the toilet, and they were dead. And it was at that point my mind started racing. My daughter and my wife happened to be in the hotel room that we were at, and I, yelled at my wife. I'm like, Heather, get over here. You have to see this. And my daughter comes running over at the time. She was about only 3 years old at the time. And she's like, Dad, why do you have string hanging from your butt? And I'm like, Heather, get over here. And I continued I grabbed some toilet paper, grabbed onto him, slowly pulled him out, flushed the toilet, and my mind just started racing. I said, wait a minute. If I, a relatively healthy guy, have these worms in me, who else does? And I started implementing them with my chronic Lyme disease clients. And that was one of the biggest breakthroughs that I saw. And it's because that parasite step is the one that I was missing clinically.
Nutrition is affected by so many different things. You can have an impeccable diet. You can take all the right supplements. But if you have a tore up gastrointestinal tract, your body can't absorb it. Yeah. Okay? If you don't have a good balance of microbes in your gut, meaning absence of parasites, meaning low amounts of candida and other pathogenic microbes, and very high amounts of your lactobacilli, your bifidae, all your different your probiotics. Okay, you need to have massive amounts of those and very minimal amounts of the others. One of the things that happens in our digestive system is our probiotics feed the nutrients to the receptor sites on our gut wall. If you don't have the right, zinc moving microbes in your gut, you don't absorb zinc. If you don't have the right calcium ones, you don't absorb calcium. You know what I'm saying? And so we have to have the right balance of microbes in our gut. We have to have a fully functioning stomach and intestines in order for nutrition to operate even. Okay? If our gut is dysfunctional, the nutrition can't work because we can't absorb it properly.
So we've heard some great information here on building up and maintaining a healthy gut microbiome and how essential this is to mental health. Just to recap, we first want to find ways to eliminate bad bacteria with a water or mineral broth fast. So you may want to do this for about 3 days. From there, you can begin eating prebiotic fermented foods. These foods feed the good bacteria. Then add probiotics, which will increase your good bacteria, so that if you're eating fermented foods while you're taking probiotics, this will help you to build up that healthy microbiome. You'll also want to be eating plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables in order to provide fiber to feed the beneficial bacteria. A great next step to take is to do a parasite cleanse to really keep the gut clear of any organisms that could cause damage. Finally, while you're doing these steps that we've mentioned, you will want to be sure to eliminate gluten, perhaps grains for a time, or any allergen-producing foods that may damage your gut lining. These protocols will give your gut the boost that it needs to thrive and reset your digestive system. This should have a positive impact on your overall health and mental health as well. Another issue that some physicians and scientists have begun to explore is how gut health can affect mental health in the form of ADD. Since this condition is often diagnosed and medicated in childhood, it is time to start asking ourselves, what are our kids eating? Or maybe it's your grandkids. What kind of diet do they have? What kind of lifestyle do they have? What's really going on in their brains on a chemical level? And can it be corrected?
Drug therapy is not the only way. And for people who have a chronic illness like fibromyalgia or anxiety and depression, it's probably many times, or oftentimes I should say, it's not the best choice. If you can do it naturally. Now, I'm a realist. There's a time and there's a place. And you should never feel guilty. If you need to be on antidepressant, you need to be on antidepressant. But if you've not explored working with somebody that's really knowledgeable about helping you overcome your health issues and doing it naturally, then I think you owe it to yourself to give that a try.
Today we've learned about the vital things that we may be doing but have not realized that our mental health has been deeply affected. While it's difficult to find out that we've been damaging our bodies, it's amazing to know that we've been designed with an incredible ability to heal when given the right components. Our habits often become ingrained and we may feel that there are obstacles in our path, but it's never too late to make the changes. Our brains are very plastic, and as we've talked about, they do have an ability to transform and to heal if we take the time to follow the right steps and choose the right foods and keep a healthy gut, to take the supplements and minerals needed for nutrition, and to keep our brains active with real-world activities and less screen time. That's when we'll begin to see the positive changes take place.